When I first heard about chord substitutions, I thought it just meant using a more colorful chord. But now, after playing for over 35 years, I tend to look at chord symbols more as guideposts, and depending on the context, I feel free to change things up, either to make them sound a certain way, or to make them sort of fit onto the guitar more naturally. This information is going to most help you if you play from lead sheets or from lyric sheets like this, where it just tells you the names of the chords and the words. It's also very valuable for songwriters or for people writing or arranging music for guitar. Novice guitarists know some chords, but understandably still struggle with the more difficult ones. And so we're strumming our way through a song, and there might just be one or two chords that are giving us technical difficulty. And so for this level, we're going to do substitutions mostly to make the chords easier. One pretty safe chord substitution, which barely even counts as a substitution, is just to use another version of the same chord. This E7 has 4 fingers, while this one only has 2, but they're both spelled the same way. The classic example for novices is the dreaded F chord, imbiber of souls. My advice is pretty simple. Just try the big one for like a minute a day, and in the meantime, substitute one of these simplified ones to kind of get by, and you'll get it eventually. One of my pet peeves is the way that some publications do their guitar chords. It's not even that they're wrong, it's just like, well, here's my image of what happens. This piano guy, who is probably amazingly good musicianship and ears and theory knowledge and everything, transcribes the song with amazing accuracy, and so far I'm really impressed. But then this is where he sort of loses me. He looks at the basic chord from the piano, or often the piano chord plus the note that the singer is singing, and then basically through math, he gets a chord name. Then he goes to a list of chords or an app and looks up the chord, and the problem is that we often end up with chords that don't seem very well suited to the guitar. Because of the key, they seem unfairly difficult, or because they are highly impractical to change between. So one thing that I think it's sort of fair game for us to do is to ignore some of the numbers in chord names. Okay, I'm not saying like that's the proper or best way, but it's a bit of a hack. I can't get too much into it, but chords that just have a letter and number in their name are built on a major triad. So if we remove the numbers, we still have the basic notes. It's the same thing for major, and for minor, it's the same deal, except we keep the minor quality. And it is a little dangerous when it says diminished, augmented, or flat 5 or sharp 5. And that's getting into higher level stuff, so for now, use your ears. Sometimes we end up adding in numbers, but it's more about making it easier for our fingers, and the number is just what we get. A good example again is F. Many novices might play more like this, which gives us F major 7. Now, the safety of this chord is pretty good, but there are times where the open E won't match the scale. So for now, if you don't like that note, you can sort of mute or skip that string and just play it like this. For the bar chord version of B minor, I often use this B minor 7 as a bridge until the student starts to feel more confident with the big version. For slash chords, we just need to know that the first letter is the chord and the second letter is the note that it's over. So C over E is a C chord, but E is the lowest note. So we can also relatively safely ignore the over something part and just play the chord. So hopefully in our band, the bass player will play that note for us, or else we just live without it to get by for now. For the basic level, I'm assuming the player already knows most of the common open chords, or what my one teacher liked to call campfire chords, and they probably know or are learning the basic bar chords. At this level, we can get into some cool chord substitutions, and I have some fun examples. One thing we can often do is a pedal chord. The music just says one chord, but we kind of alternate between 2 chords. It's basically this. This is sort of the main chord, and the lower note is the pedal. It stays the same, and the chord above changes. And so in blues, but in other places too, we often hear this alternating pedal chord. And so here's a really fun example. Often if we have chords whose roots are separated by a third, we can sort of fill in the gap with the missing one. And inversions often work really well for passing chords. Have you ever seen this old school jazz chord book? It's pretty awesome and I love it, but it's just like hundreds and hundreds of chord diagrams, and the book has some awesome stuff about chord substitutions as I recall. But the thing is, it makes it seem like you need to memorize all those chords, and then as you play you just sort of choose from this huge list, but it's not really like that. We can't get too deep into it today, but I want to start to give you an idea of how we can know what notes we can sort of safely add to chords. The safest way is to add or substitute other notes from the key or scale into the chord. In the key of C, we have these chords, and basically all of the weird chord names and numbers and extensions come from some combination of these notes. And on guitar, we can only reach what we can reach. And so we have this open C major scale, which is all of the notes that we can reach in first position. Then we take a chord from the key, which will already be made of some of those notes, and we just try adding or substituting other notes from the scale. It's a really good way to add some motion and depth to your accompaniment. Some chords can be substituted for others because they're made of mostly the same notes. If we have the C major 7 chord, we can see that it has the notes of an E minor triad contained within it. So we could say that C major 7 is the same result as the slash chord E minor over C. But it basically means that we can use E minor as a substitute for C, or at least we can try it and see if we like it. Likewise, we can use E minor 7 as a fancy C major 9 chord, assuming that we have a C in the bass somewhere. And then this is the best little minor chord trick ever. If you take a minor triad and extend it up to the 9th, we sort of have two stacked minor triads. And so it often works well that if you're trying to spice up a minor chord that lasts for a long time, to sort of pedal back and forth between the minor triad and the minor triad that starts on the 5th. So if it says A minor, we can alternate between that and E minor and make up a cool little thing. If we're going to substitute a chord with a different root, the safest way to do it is to find the other two chords in the key that could support that note. There are 3 notes in a chord, and so a melody note could be any of them. And so there are 3 different chords that can be used to support each note. But that doesn't mean that they'll sound equally good. So try it out and see if you like the result. But it gives you a way to add some more depth or a bit of surprise to your chords. At the pro level, you can see and hear what the chords mean, or like their functions. You don't necessarily need to know in a super academic way, but pros probably want to do chord substitutions mainly for musical or like artistic reasons. But that can still include making things easier to play. If we want to add some even more colorful notes to our chords, we can start to experiment with going a little bit outside of the key. For example, say we have this major 7 chord that is functioning as a 1 chord in a major key. so to give it an extra splash of color, we could substitute a Lydian type chord. So C Lydian is from the parent scale of G major. For many chords, you can probably precede it by its dominant chord. So in A minor, the dominant of the key is an E major chord. And so if we find the chord with the same relationship to the 4 chord, D minor, we can see that it's A major. So that's how we get this kind of familiar chord substitution. So maybe there's still some nuance to it, but it's at least worth a try. Sort of target a chord by preceding it by its dominant. If we're given C to A minor, we might be able to precede A minor with its dominant E. We can also borrow chords from the parallel major or minor key, and the classic example is using the minor 4 chord in major. I can't do a video about chord subs and not mention tritone substitutions. It even just kind of sounds cool. It's basically like a dominant 7th chord has a tritone in it already, between the 3rd and the 7th. And these are the notes that pleasingly resolve in tonal music. But you could also build a dominant chord on the note a tritone away, and it would share the same 2 pitches, but they switch roles as 3 and 7. So basically it just sounds cool and sort of equivalent in a way to take a usual 5 chord and turn it into a tritone sub 5. We've been slowly moving out of the safe zone, and now we're getting a little closer to the edge. Here's a cool one, which is basically the idea of the right note in the wrong chord. And it's really good for sort of unexpected fake-out endings. This is the right note for this melody to end on, but then the chord is surprising. Or here's another kind of example. For this meta level, I basically just want to apply the principle that less is more, because we can often gain a lot of advantage by using fewer notes. As a novice, we can try leaving out certain strings of chords to make them easier to play. I personally use this easy G all the time, or this even easier E minor voicing, or even this one. If you're playing fingerstyle, you can kind of say, I'm just going to use these 3 or 4 strings, and so maybe I don't even need to use that other left-hand finger. And so we can make lots of easier to play chords by leaving out some strings altogether. Just an idea to play around with. At higher levels, we can start to use less notes, but another thing we can do is learn all of our little triad shapes, and then we can open up so many possibilities for range, like cute little happy high triads or dark and low ones. I'm gonna do a video on these soon, but here's just a little study that's sort of a guided tour of some minor triads on guitar, so you can see some of the options. For the higher levels of chord substitution, it's basically a prerequisite to have a good understanding of the fretboard and all the notes. And so if you're wanting to work on that, this is a good place to start. And if you're interested in the names of chords and what all the numbers and symbols mean and what chord functions are, I recommend starting with this.